The dust settled on the horizon as Dalton Everett reined in his sweating stallion, the vast Kansas plains stretching endlessly before him. He was running from something, not the law, not bandits, but the crushing emptiness that had followed him since the war. The year was 1872, and like many men who'd survived the bloodshed, Dalton had found peace elusive in the aftermath. What he hadn't expected to find was her, standing alone outside the general store in St. Louis, Missouri, with eyes that reflected the same haunted weariness he carried within himself. Dorothy Davenport had not planned to stay in St. Louis. The bustling river town was meant to be merely a stopover on her journey west, another place to disappear into after fleeing the remnants of her old life in Boston. The doctor's words still echoed in her mind, clinical and cold. The fever damaged your womb beyond repair. You will never bear children. At 26, she had watched her engagement dissolve, her fiancé's family rejecting her as though she were somehow less of a woman. So she had packed what little she owned and headed west, seeking something she couldn't name. The summer heat beat down relentlessly as Dalton dismounted in front of the saloon. 3 weeks had passed since he'd first seen Dorothy, and in that time, he'd found more excuses to visit the small dressmaking shop where she had found employment than he cared to admit. "Back again, Mr. Everett?" Dorothy asked, not looking up from her stitching as the bell above the door announced his arrival. "Seems my shirts keep losing buttons at an alarming rate, Miss Davenport," he replied, the hint of a smile softening his weathered features. She glanced up then, a strand of auburn hair falling across her forehead. "At this rate, sir, I might suspect you of tearing them off deliberately." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, that they were both adrift in a world that moved too quickly around them. "Would you consider having dinner with me tonight?" The words tumbled out before Dalton could reconsider them. Dorothy's needle paused mid-stitch. "I don't think that would be proper, Mr. Everett." "Nothing improper about two people sharing a meal," he countered. "The hotel dining room is respectable enough for even the most discerning lady." She studied him, taking in the earnestness behind his request. "Very well. One dinner." As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the cobbled streets, Dorothy found herself seated across from Dalton in the hotel's modest dining room. The candlelight softened the hard edges that life had carved into his face, revealing glimpses of the man he might have been before war and hardship had claimed their toll. "What brings you to St. Louis?" he asked, pouring her a glass of water. Dorothy hesitated, weighing how much truth to reveal. A fresh start. Boston held too many memories. "Memories have a way of following," Dalton observed. "Indeed, and what of you? You don't strike me as a man born to city life." He chuckled, the sound rusty as though rarely used. "No, madam. I've got a small ranch about 20 miles outside of town. Nothing fancy, but the land's good. Cattle mostly, though I've got a few horses I'm training. A cowboy, then, in a manner of speaking, though these days I spend more time mending fences than riding the range." As the evening progressed, the conversation flowed more easily. Dorothy found herself drawn to Dalton's quiet strength, his lack of pretense. He spoke of his ranch with pride but without boasting, described the beauty of dawn breaking over the prairie with a poet's appreciation. "Would you care for a walk?" he asked when they had finished their meal. "The riverfront is quite pleasant in the evening." They strolled along the Mississippi, the water reflecting the first emerging stars. In the gathering darkness, Dorothy found it easier to speak of things she rarely shared. "I was engaged once," she said softly. "In Boston." Dalton remained silent, allowing her to continue at her own pace. "There was an outbreak of scarlet fever. I survived, but—" She swallowed hard. The doctor said I would never be able to have children. My fiancé's family considered it reason enough to break our engagement. The shame she'd carried for so long rose up again, threatening to choke her. To her surprise, Dalton's response held no pity, just a simple understanding. Some people measure worth in strange ways, he said. As if a woman's value lies solely in what she can provide, rather than who she is. Dorothy felt tears prick at her eyes, quickly blinking them away. And what of you? Have you left someone behind as well? A shadow crossed his face. My wife died 5 years ago. Childbirth. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. A man who had lost his wife to childbirth. A woman who could never bear children. I'm sorry, she whispered. Life continues, he said simply. Though sometimes I wonder to what purpose. They parted that night with a formal handshake, but something had shifted between them. Over the following weeks, their meetings became more frequent. Dalton found reasons to come to town. Dorothy accepted his invitations to Sunday drives. She met his closest friend, Kurt Edwards, who ran the town's livery stable and teased Dalton mercilessly about his sudden interest in town affairs. Never seen him brush his hair so careful, Kurt remarked to Dorothy one afternoon when she came to meet Dalton for a ride. Used to be I couldn't get him to come to town more than once a month. Now he's here every few days with some excuse or other. Dorothy felt a blush creep up her neck. Mr. Edwards, you'll embarrass your friend. That's half the fun of friendship, Kurt replied with a wink. Autumn arrived with a blaze of color across the Missouri landscape. Dalton invited Dorothy to visit his ranch, assuring her that his housekeeper, an elderly widow named Mrs. Holloway, would be present to maintain propriety. The ranch was smaller than Dorothy had imagined, but well kept. A modest 2-story house stood surrounded by cottonwood trees just beginning to turn golden. Fenced pastures stretched toward distant hills, cattle grazing contentedly in the afternoon sun. It's beautiful, Dorothy said as Dalton helped her down from the wagon. It's home, he replied simply. Took me some time to make it so, but now I can't imagine being anywhere else. Mrs. Holloway emerged from the house, wiping flour-covered hands on her apron. About time you brought your young lady to visit, she called. I've been hearing about nothing else for weeks. Mrs. Holloway exaggerates, Dalton mumbled, the tips of his ears reddening. The older woman snorted. I do no such thing. Now come inside before the pie gets cold. The interior of the house revealed Dalton's character more clearly than words could have. The furniture was sturdy and practical, but there were unexpected touches: bookshelves lined with volumes of poetry and history, a piano in the corner, curtains that softened the strong lines of the windows. You play? Dorothy asked, gesturing toward the piano. Poorly, he admitted. My wife taught music before we married. I keep it tuned, though I rarely touch the keys myself. After a lunch of roast chicken and fresh bread, Dalton took Dorothy on a tour of the ranch. He showed her the stable where he kept his prized horses, the barn where new calves were sheltered, the small orchard that provided apples and pears in season. You've built something wonderful here, Dorothy said as they walked back toward the house, the sun beginning its descent toward the horizon. It's a good life, he agreed. Lonely at times, but good. Their eyes met, and Dorothy felt something flutter in her chest, a sensation she had thought long buried with her dreams of family and belonging. As winter approached, bringing with it shorter days and biting winds, Dorothy found herself thinking of Dalton more often than not. His visits to town became the highlights of her weeks, bright spots in the routine of her days at the dress shop. It was during the first heavy snowfall of the season that everything changed. Dalton had come to town for supplies, intending to return to the ranch before the storm worsened. But the weather had other plans, the snow falling faster and thicker than anyone had anticipated. "You can't possibly ride back tonight," Dorothy insisted, meeting him outside the general store where he was loading his wagon. "The road will be impassable within the hour." "I've got animals to tend to," he argued, though his expression showed he knew she was right. "Kurt can send one of his boys," she countered. "It's not worth risking your life." In the end, logic prevailed. Arrangements were made for one of Kurt's stable hands to ride to the ranch with instructions for Mrs. Holloway, and Dalton secured a room at the hotel. That evening, with the town muffled under a blanket of snow, they sat in the hotel's small parlor, a fire crackling in the grate. Few other guests ventured downstairs, leaving them in relative privacy despite being in a public space. "I never thanked you," Dorothy said suddenly. Dalton looked up from the checkerboard between them. "For what?" "For not looking at me differently when I told you about." She gestured vaguely. "My condition." He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "Why would I? It doesn't change who you are." "Most men want children," she said softly. "A family to carry on their name." "Most men haven't seen what I've seen," he replied. "During the war, I watched men die for causes they barely understood, clinging to lockets with pictures of children they'd never meet. After a while, you start questioning what truly matters." He moved a checker piece, then continued without looking up. "When Sarah died, my wife, she was carrying our first child. For months afterward, I blamed myself, wondered if I could have done something differently. In time, I realized that what I missed most wasn't the promise of a child, but her laugh, her way of seeing beauty in ordinary things." Dorothy reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "You loved her very much." "I did." He turned his hand to clasp hers. "And for a long time I thought that part of me had died with her, until I met you." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Dorothy felt her heart beating rapidly against her ribs. "Dalton, You don't need to say anything," he assured her. "I'm not asking for promises. I just wanted you to know that you've brought something back to life in me that I thought was gone forever." The blizzard raged for 3 days, effectively cutting St. Louis off from the surrounding countryside. During that time, Dorothy and Dalton spent hours together, talking, playing chess, reading aloud from books borrowed from the hotel's modest library. By the time the snow stopped and the roads began to clear, something profound had shifted between them. "I'd like to call on you properly," Dalton said on the morning he was finally able to return to his ranch. "If you're amenable." Dorothy smiled, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the fire in the hotel lobby. "I believe I would be quite amenable to that, Mr. Everett." Winter's grip gradually loosened as February gave way to March. The rhythms of their courtship, for that was what it had become, settled into a pattern. Dalton came to town twice weekly, taking Dorothy to dinner, to the occasional theatrical production that passed through, or simply for walks along the riverfront once the weather permitted. In April, he invited her to an auction being held at a neighboring ranch. "They've got some Arabian stock I've been eyeing," he explained. "Thought you might enjoy the outing. It'll be an all-day affair, but Mrs. Holloway will come along as chaperone." The auction was larger than Dorothy had expected, drawing ranchers and horse traders from across 3 states. Dalton moved through the crowd with easy confidence, greeting acquaintances, studying the animals with a critical eye. Dorothy found herself fascinated by this glimpse into his world. "What do you think of that one?" he asked, nodding toward a chestnut mare being led around a small paddock. Dorothy studied the horse, noting its alert ears and graceful movements. "She's beautiful. Seems gentle, too." Dalton smiled approvingly. "Good eye." She's got excellent bloodlines, and that temperament is exactly what I look for. I'm thinking of expanding my breeding program." As the day progressed, Dorothy noticed several women watching Dalton with undisguised interest. It struck her suddenly that he was considered quite a catch, a successful rancher, handsome in his understated way, unattached. "You have admirers," she commented during a lull in the proceedings. "Hum." He followed her gaze to where two young women were glancing in their direction. "Ah, the Henderson sisters. Their father owns the largest cattle operation in the county. Been trying to marry them off for years." "And yet you've remained unenticed," Dorothy observed, trying to keep her tone light. Dalton's expression softened as he looked at her. "I've found more compelling company elsewhere." The auction concluded with Dalton acquiring both the chestnut mare and a promising yearling colt. As they were preparing to leave, a commotion broke out near the corrals. A stallion had broken loose and was charging through the crowd. Without hesitation, Dalton pushed Dorothy toward safety, then moved toward the panicked animal. With a skill born of years working with horses, he managed to corner and calm the stallion, leading it back to its enclosure while spectators watched in admiration. "That was incredibly brave," Dorothy said when he returned, his shirt torn at the shoulder but otherwise unharmed. "Or incredibly foolish," Mrs. Holloway muttered, though her eyes shone with pride. "Man could have been trampled." "Just did what needed doing," Dalton replied with characteristic modesty. But Dorothy had seen something in those moments, a decisive courage, a willingness to put himself at risk to protect others that only deepened her growing feelings for him. On the journey back to the ranch, where Dorothy would stay the night in the guest room before returning to town the next day, a comfortable silence settled between them. The prairie stretched out on either side of the road, the first wildflowers of spring creating splashes of color against the green. "I'd like to show you something," Dalton said as they approached the ranch, steering the wagon down a side trail rather than continuing to the house. The path led to a small rise overlooking a meandering creek. A massive old oak tree stood sentinel at the top, its branches just beginning to leaf out. "This is my favorite spot on the whole property," Dalton said as he helped Dorothy down from the wagon. Mrs. Holloway, understanding the moment's importance, remained in the wagon, pretending to fuss with her knitting. Hand in hand, they walked to the oak tree. The view was spectacular: rolling hills, the creek catching the late afternoon sunlight, the ranch buildings in the middle distance looking solid and permanent against the vast landscape. "I come here to think," Dalton said, "when decisions need making or problems need solving." Dorothy squeezed his hand. "It's perfect." He turned to face her, his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. "Dorothy, I'm not a man of fancy words or grand gestures, but I know my own mind and I know my heart." Her breath caught as he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. "This was my mother's," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold ring with a small pearl. "Nothing extravagant, but it was given with love as I'm giving it now." He took her hand, his own trembling slightly. "Dorothy Davenport, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sprang to her eyes, joy mingling with an old sorrow. "Dalton, there's something I need to say first, something you need to consider." "If it's about children, it is," she interrupted gently. "You should have a family, a son or daughter to inherit all you've built." Dalton shook his head. "What I want is a partner, someone to share my days and nights, someone who understands that life isn't about what we've lost, but what we choose to build with what remains." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I can't give you children," she whispered, the words still painful to speak aloud. Dalton cupped her face in his calloused hands. "You already give me everything," he whispered back. "Hope, purpose, joy, Those are the inheritances that truly matter. Dorothy felt something inside her break and heal simultaneously. "Yes," she said through her tears. "Yes, I will marry you." The kiss they shared beneath the oak tree sealed more than a promise. It marked the beginning of a new story, one written not in what was missing, but in what had been found. They were married on the first day of summer, 1873, in a simple ceremony at the small church in St. Louis. Kurt stood as Dalton's best man, while the owner of the dress shop, Mrs. Bennett, attended Dorothy. Mrs. Holloway wept unashamedly throughout, declaring later that she'd never seen a more perfect match in all her 63 years. The early days of their marriage passed in a sun-drenched haze of happiness. Dorothy took to ranch life with surprising ease, learning to manage the household accounts, tending the vegetable garden that had fallen into neglect, even helping with the gentler horses. Dalton watched her transformation from city woman to rancher's wife with undisguised admiration. "You're a natural," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "As if you were born to this life." "Perhaps I was," she replied, leaning against his shoulder. "Just took me a while to find my way here." Life settled into seasonal rhythms: spring calving, summer haying, fall roundups, winter's quiet planning for the year ahead. They expanded the ranch operations gradually, adding more breeding stock, improving the pastures, hiring additional hands as needed. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Their third autumn brought drought, forcing difficult decisions about which animals to keep and which to sell before winter. The following spring, floods washed out fences and stranded cattle on isolated patches of high ground, requiring days of exhausting rescue work. Through it all, their partnership only strengthened. Dalton came to rely on Dorothy's practical mind and steady optimism. She drew courage from his resilience and unwavering support. Yet despite their happiness, Dorothy sometimes caught Dalton watching families in town with a wistfulness he tried to hide. She would feel the old guilt rising, the sense that she had deprived him of something fundamental. It was Kurt who inadvertently provided the solution. During a visit to the ranch, he mentioned a situation in the neighboring county. "Train accident last week," he said as they shared an after-dinner drink. "Couple traveling west with their children. Parents didn't make it. 3 young ones left behind, 2 boys and a baby girl." "How terrible," Dorothy murmured. "What will happen to them?" Kurt shrugged. "County's looking for relatives back east, but so far nothing. Minister's wife is caring for them temporarily, but she's already got 7 of her own, talking about splitting them up if homes can't be found." That night after Kurt had gone, Dorothy found Dalton standing on the porch, gazing at the stars. "I've been thinking about what Kurt said," she began tentatively. Dalton turned, his expression questioning. "About the children, the orphans," she clarified. Perhaps we might visit them. See if there's some way we could help." A slow smile spread across his face. "I was thinking the same thing." The next day, they rode to the neighboring town of Clayton. The minister's house was easy to find, a modest dwelling next to the church, overflowing with the sounds of children. The minister's wife, Mrs. Parker, greeted them with obvious relief when they explained their interest. "The Lord provides," she said, ushering them inside. "I've been praying for a solution, especially for these little ones." The children were huddled together in a corner of the crowded parlor, a boy of about 7 standing protectively in front of his younger brother, who appeared to be around 4. The baby girl, barely a year old, was asleep in a makeshift cradle nearby. "This is James, Mrs. Parker introduced the oldest boy. "And that's William. The baby is Emma. They've been very brave, but it's hard. They only had each other even before the accident. Parents were taking them to California for a fresh start. James regarded the newcomers with suspicion, his thin shoulders squared as if preparing for disappointment. Dorothy knelt to his level, making no move to touch him. "Hello, James. My name is Dorothy, and this is my husband, Dalton. We're very sorry about your parents." The boy said nothing, but his eyes, a startling shade of blue, assessed her carefully. "We have a ranch," Dalton said, crouching down as well. "Lots of space, horses, a creek for fishing. Been thinking it's too quiet there, just the two of us." William peered around his brother, interest flickering across his face at the mention of horses. "You want to take us away?" James said, his first word since their arrival. "It wasn't a question." "We'd like to offer you a home," Dorothy corrected gently. "All three of you together. But only if you want that." "People always want to take the baby," James said bitterly. "Nobody wants boys my age, and they want to split us up." "That's not our intention," Dalton assured him. "Family belongs together, that's what we believe." James studied them for a long moment. "Can I think about it?" "Of course," Dorothy said. "It's a big decision." They returned to the ranch with heavy hearts, uncertain whether they had connected with the children, especially the wary James. But 3 days later, a telegram arrived from the minister. "Children agreeable. Papers being prepared. Can come when ready." Preparations became a whirlwind of activity. The unused bedroom at the end of the hall was transformed into a space for the boys, while a smaller adjoining room was outfitted as a nursery for Emma. Mrs. Holloway, initially skeptical about the sudden addition of 3 children to the household, soon threw herself into the work with surprising enthusiasm. "Always thought this place needed young ones," she admitted, as she helped Dorothy assemble a crib that Dalton had purchased in town. "Just never expected it to happen all at once." A week later, they brought the children home. The journey was tense, James maintaining a stolid silence while William peppered them with questions, and Emma alternated between fussing and curious observation. By the time they reached the ranch, evening was approaching, casting long shadows across the yard. "Is this all yours?" William asked, eyes wide as he took in the sprawling property. "It's all ours now," Dalton corrected gently, including the children in the statement. "Your home, for as long as you want it to be." That first night was difficult. Emma woke screaming every few hours, inconsolable until Dorothy discovered that singing softly while rocking her gradually soothed her back to sleep. William, initially excited about his new surroundings, broke down in tears at bedtime, asking for his mother. James remained stoic, but Dorothy noticed that he positioned his bed to be between the door and his younger brother, as if still expecting danger. Days stretched into weeks, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the children began to adapt. William took to ranch life with enthusiasm, following Dalton everywhere, asking endless questions about the animals. Emma, once she adjusted to her new surroundings, revealed herself to be a sunny-natured baby, quick to smile and eager to explore. James remained the most difficult to reach. He performed any chores assigned to him diligently, but spoke little and remained watchful, as if waiting for the arrangement to fall apart. He particularly avoided Dorothy, shying away from any attempt at physical affection. "Give him time," Dalton advised when Dorothy expressed her concerns. "Boy's lost everyone he trusted. Can't expect him to believe this is permanent overnight." The breakthrough came unexpectedly, during a violent thunderstorm that swept across the prairie one August night. Dorothy was awakened by a crash of thunder so loud it seemed to shake the house. Instinctively, she went to check on the children. Emma was still sleeping soundly, but when she reached the boys' room, she found William's bed empty. Panic seized her until she spotted both boys huddled in James's bed, the younger brother trembling while James tried unsuccessfully to comfort him. "It's just noise," James was saying, though his own voice wavered. "Can't hurt you." Dorothy approached slowly. "May I join you?" she asked. James looked up, his face illuminated briefly by a flash of lightning. For once, his expression was unguarded, a boy terrified but trying desperately to be brave for his brother's sake. "William's scared," he said, as if that explained everything. Dorothy sat on the edge of the bed. "I used to be afraid of storms too," she confided. "My father taught me a trick for counting between the lightning and thunder to know how far away it is." William peeked out from under the blanket. "How does it work?" She explained the simple calculation, and soon both boys were counting eagerly with each lightning flash, relieved to have something to focus on besides their fear. Gradually, William's eyelids began to droop, and he fell asleep leaning against his brother. "You're good with him," Dorothy said softly to James. He shrugged. "Had to be. After Ma got sick, Pa was working all the time. It was my job to look after them. That's a lot of responsibility for someone your age." Another flash, another rumble, but the storm was moving away now, the gaps between lightning and thunder lengthening. "You miss them?" James asked suddenly. "Your parents?" Dorothy nodded. "Every day. My mother died when I was about your age. My father passed away just before I came west." "Does it ever stop hurting?" The question broke her heart with its simple honesty. "Not entirely," she admitted, "but it changes. The sharp pain becomes more like a quiet ache, and you find that you can remember the good things without it hurting quite so much." James was quiet for a long moment. "Mr. Everett Dalton, he said you couldn't have babies of your own. Is that true?" The question caught her off guard. "Yes, that's true." "Is that why you took us?" "Because you couldn't have your own." Dorothy chose her words carefully. "We took you in because you needed a family, and we had love to give. Not having children of my own doesn't make me want you any less, or love you any differently than if I had given birth to you." James absorbed this, his young face solemn in the dim light. "I think maybe my ma would like that you're taking care of Emma. She was always worried about who would look after her if something happened." It wasn't acceptance, not quite yet, but it was a beginning. Dorothy reached out, and for the first time, James allowed her to brush the hair back from his forehead without flinching away. "Would you like me to stay until you fall asleep?" she asked. He nodded just once, but it was enough. From that night forward, something shifted. James began to seek Dorothy out, asking for help with his reading, watching as she tended the garden, eventually offering to assist with the smaller chores. His defenses didn't come down all at once, but the walls were lower. The windows opened a crack to let in light and air. By the time autumn painted the cottonwoods gold, they had become, in halting steps and small daily miracles, a family. Not conventional, perhaps, not what either Dorothy or Dalton had once imagined, but real and solid nonetheless. On the 1-year anniversary of the children's arrival, they held a celebration. Mrs. Holloway baked a special cake, and Kurt brought gifts for each child: a hand-carved wooden horse for William, a rag doll for Emma, and for James, a journal bound in soft leather. After the gifts had been opened and the cake devoured, after William and Emma had been tucked into bed, James lingered in the parlor. He approached Dorothy and Dalton with unusual hesitation, clutching something behind his back. "I made something," he said, "for today." He produced a roughly carved wooden plaque, clearly the result of many hours of secret labor. Burned into the wood in careful, childish letters were the words, "The Everett Family." "Kurt showed me how to do the burning part," he explained, suddenly uncertain. "Do you like it?" Dorothy felt tears spring to her eyes. "It's beautiful, James. I thought maybe we could hang it by the front door," he suggested. So people know who lives here. Dalton's voice was suspiciously husky as he replied, I think that's exactly where it belongs. Later that night, with the house quiet and the children asleep, Dorothy and Dalton stood on the porch, gazing up at the star-filled sky. Did you ever imagine this? She asked, leaning into the solid warmth of his embrace. A year ago, it was just the two of us. No, he admitted. But then, I never imagined you either. Life has a way of giving us what we need, even when it's not what we thought we wanted. She turned in his arms to face him. Any regrets? His answer was immediate and certain. Not a single one. Dorothy thought of the day beneath the oak tree, of her fear and his certainty, of the words that had changed everything. You already give me everything. He had been right, she realized. What made a family wasn't blood or birth, but love freely given and gratefully received. What made a home wasn't the absence of loss, but the courage to build something new from its ashes. Come to bed, husband, she said, taking his hand. Tomorrow comes early, and we have 3 very energetic reasons to be well rested. Dalton smiled, the expression transforming his face in the moonlight. Yes, madam. Wouldn't want to disappoint our family. The years flowed by like the creek that wound through their property, sometimes rushing, sometimes meandering, but always moving forward. The children grew, as children do, through skinned knees and schoolyard triumphs, through nightmares and dreams, through the countless ordinary days that, strung together, create a life. James, who had once been so wary, blossomed into a thoughtful young man with a gift for understanding animals. By 16, he was Dalton's right hand in the ranch operations, with an eye for horseflesh that even experienced traders respected. William's boundless energy found focus in mechanics and building. He could fix anything with moving parts and was constantly designing improvements for the ranch equipment. His workshop behind the barn became a place of perpetual creation, filled with drawings and half-completed projects. And Emma, their sunshine child, grew into a girl who combined Dorothy's practicality with an artist's soul, filling sketchbooks with drawings of the ranch and its inhabitants, writing stories that she read aloud by the fire on winter evenings. The ranch prospered under their collective care. Dalton's breeding program gained recognition throughout the region, bringing buyers from as far away as Colorado and Texas. Dorothy established a small side business selling preserved fruits and vegetables, her jams winning ribbons at the county fair 3 years running. They faced hardships, of course. A harsh winter in 1880 nearly decimated their cattle herd. James broke his leg badly when thrown from a horse at 17, leaving him with a slight limp that ended his dreams of competing in rodeos. Emma contracted scarlet fever at 9, the same disease that had altered Dorothy's life so dramatically, causing weeks of terrified vigilance before she recovered fully. Through it all, the foundation remained solid: the love between Dorothy and Dalton, the bonds that connected them to the children, who had become so completely theirs in every way that mattered. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Dalton surprised Dorothy with a trip. "Kurt's going to manage things here," he told her. "The children are old enough to help. I want to take you to see the ocean." It was a 3-week journey by train to the California coast, the farthest either of them had ever traveled. They stood hand in hand on a beach near San Francisco, watching the endless waves roll in. "It makes you feel small, doesn't it?" Dorothy mused. "All that vastness." "Makes me grateful," Dalton replied, "for every choice that led us here, for you." When they returned home, refreshed and renewed, it was to find that the children had collaborated on a surprise of their own, a portrait of the 5 of them, commissioned from a traveling artist who had passed through St. Louis. It hung in pride of place above the fireplace, a testament to the family they had built together. As the children approached adulthood, new chapters began. James, at 21, took over a neighboring property that Dalton had acquired, establishing his own homestead while remaining closely connected to the original ranch. He married the daughter of the local doctor, a spirited young woman named Lucy who shared his love of the land. William, ever the inventor, patented a more efficient irrigation system that brought modest wealth and recognition. His work took him to Kansas City for periods of time, but he always returned to the ranch, bringing new ideas and endless enthusiasm. Emma, their youngest, showed a talent for teaching that led her to the local schoolhouse. Her natural empathy made her beloved by her students, and her innovative methods gradually transformed education in their small community. In the autumn of 1893, 20 years after Dorothy and Dalton had married beneath the oak tree, they gathered for a family dinner. The table, once so spacious for just the two of them, was now filled to capacity. James and Lucy with their twin boys, William and his fiancée, Clara, Emma with the young lawyer she had been seeing, and Kurt, now silver-haired but still quick-witted, an honorary grandfather to them all. After dinner, Dalton tapped his glass for attention. "I'd like to propose a toast," he said, rising to his feet. 20 years ago, I asked a very special woman to share my life. I had no idea then what that life would become." He looked around the table, his eyes lingering on each face. "I couldn't have imagined this family we've built. Couldn't have known how full my heart could be." His gaze came to rest on Dorothy, who sat at the opposite end of the table, her auburn hair now streaked with silver, her eyes still as bright as the day they'd met. "To Dorothy, who taught me that family isn't about what we lack but what we create together, who showed me that love multiplies rather than divides." "To Mother," James said, raising his glass. "To Mother," echoed William and Emma. Dorothy felt tears threatening as she looked at the faces around her, this miraculous family that had grown from the broken places in her life. "And to all of you," she managed, "who gave me everything I never dared to hope for." Later that night, when the guests had departed and the house had quieted, Dorothy found Dalton standing on the porch, much as he had on countless evenings throughout their years together. She slipped her hand into his, the gesture as natural as breathing. "Happy?" he asked, though he knew the answer. "Completely," she replied. "You know, I was thinking about what you said that day under the oak tree." "Which part?" "When I told you I couldn't give you children and you said I already gave you everything." He nodded, remembering. "I didn't fully understand then," she continued. "I thought you were just being kind or making the best of a limitation. But you were right. What we give each other, trust, understanding, a willingness to build something together, that's everything. The children were a blessing, a gift I never expected, but they weren't what made us complete." Dalton pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "The smartest thing I ever did was convince you to marry me." Dorothy laughed softly. "As I recall, it didn't take much convincing." "Best decision we ever made." Together they looked out over the ranch, their home, their legacy. In the distance, lights glowed from James's homestead. Above them, stars wheeled in ancient patterns, the same stars that had witnessed their beginning, now bearing witness to all they had become. "What do you think the next 20 years will bring?" Dorothy asked. Dalton considered the question. "More grandchildren, I expect, more challenges, certainly, more joy. More everything," she said. And in that word, everything was contained, all they had given each other, all they had received, and all that remained ahead of them as their story continued to unfold beneath the vast Missouri sky.